Good morning, Dan. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. How's the sound on my end?
It sounds just like you sound in your TikTok videos. I can hear you well. Perfect. Wonderful.
Hopefully that's good.
No, this is a true pleasure to have you join our community. If you don't know, this is a community of people that are all very much supportive of animal food for sure. And so we're always excited to get the producers. First of all, I just want to say thank you for what you do, not only as for what you do for educating people, for just producing the food. I don't think that our farmers and ranchers and dairymen get enough credit in this country. I mean, it's, we hear a lot about vilification and I mean, my gosh, I mean, you're doing the hard work every day that feeds us. And I mean, that's pretty important. So thanks again for what you do.
Oh, I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
And as you know, you're probably aware, I mean, the reason I saw you was because you were doing stuff on TikTok, and I just started on that crazy platform for some weird reason. Not sure why I did that, but somebody said, hey, check out this guy. And so I started watching. I said, that's really good because, and I've been sort of trying to be an advocate for those that raise beef and produce dairy and feed us in any way for a number of years now. And one of the laments I had was that, these farmers and ranchers are working so hard. I'm not saying you're not working hard, but they just don't have time to do this stuff. And it takes a lot of extra effort to actually teach people and educate stuff. So if you don't mind, can you just give us a little bit of your background? I know you're in Iowa and you're a dairy guy, but what kind of drove you that way? And tell us a little about your background history, if you don't mind.
Yeah. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised on this farm where I'm at today. Actually, I wasn't raised on this farm, but this particular farm has been in our family since I think 1941. My great grandpa moved over here from Nebraska. They had a drought and they ran out of crops to feed their cows. They were feeding them thistles, and so they had no choice but to leave. They knew somebody in this area, so they hiked over this way. But my dad was born and raised in the house I live in. My dad and my mom raised our family where our heifers are raised, just a few miles away. So not on this location is where I was raised, but still on this farm. And so then I went to Iowa State University. I got a bachelor's degree in dairy science. I graduated from there in 2013. I initially started to go to Iowa State to be an ag teacher. I thought I wanted to get kind of into the education field of things. And I was very active in FFA, the National FFA organization, which is near and dear to me. So I kind of thought maybe I wanted to keep doing that. But after about a semester at Iowa State, I realized it was just in my blood to farm. So graduated in 2013, came home to the farm. In 2015, my brother and I formed Honey Creek Dairy LLC. That's the name of our farm. And we bought out my uncle's half of the family operation. So my dad and my uncle were farming 50-50. My uncle reached the age of retirement, so my brother and I bought his half of the farm. And so we did that in 2015. And then we just kind of kept our nose to the grindstone and kept moving. And kind of like what you said before, I always wanted to do stuff on social media, but our previous farming style was incredibly labor intensive, and I just didn't have time. And it was very, very difficult to find the energy to do those things. So in 2019, we started having conversations about robots. And the main reason is my dad now is actually older than my uncle was when he retired. So he's to the point where he needs to slow down. So we were looking to have to hire people or automate some things. And so we decided to follow through with the automation route. And so that's what led us to where we are today. And now that we've gotten stuff dialed in, my wife and I were talking, it's like, gosh, I need a hobby. I need something to do. I was just spending all the time on the farm. And so TikTok was kind of starting to become popular during the pandemic. And so I was on TikTok for probably just about a year before I decided to actually post content. And after I did that, people really liked the robots. And so that really took off. So, I went to school to be an ag educator. So when I can combine the education side of things, well, I started at school. Obviously, I got a degree in dairy science. But when I can combine educating and farming onto one platform, that's kind of my sweet spot. So it's something I enjoy doing. But this is where we're at today, farming with 3 Lely A5 robots. We have the first automated feeding system in Iowa is the Vector, and cows are doing well. It gives us a lot of flexibility to spend time with the kids and the family, and things are going well, and we're happy with the way things are.
Yeah, one of the things that you do a really nice job as, is you kind of, there's a lot of misinformation about the way animals are handled and treated and why things are done. And it fuels a propaganda. We see it with the sort of the animal agriculture industry, whether it's PETA or some of the vegan activists, and you do a very nice job of presenting, this is why we do what we do. this is a real deal. They're not being tortured. And, you continue to make the point that an animal that's suffering or being tortured or kept in poor health is of no value to anyone. I mean,
No.
it doesn't benefit you whatsoever to do that. It's,
It doesn't make sense.
Right. Exactly. And so you do a nice job around that. But I want to, I'm just wondering, because I know when 5 years ago, I went on, not 5 years, it's been about 3.5 years ago, I went on Joe Rogan's podcast and just talking about eating meat. I said, I ate a bunch of meat and I got healthy. And that was very controversial. And so immediately after that, I was just inundated with vegan, people that just think I'm the devil and all this stuff. And so I'm just wondering if, when you started putting up videos saying, hey, this is robots, these are cows, was the intent just to educate, and then the vegans came in, and that propelled you to have to sort of counteract some of that misinformation that they're putting out there?
Yeah, I never anticipated it to really take the path that it did. It started off like when I go back and look at some of my first TikToks, it's funny for me personally, I can tell how nervous I was on those first videos. It's like it was me from 3 years ago, but it was 3 months ago. And as I got more comfortable with the platform, I've taken different avenues of educating. So the first few videos I did was simply, what are the robots? Where do our cows live? What do we do? And it was, I'll have to go back and look, but it was probably 7 or 8 videos in. I started getting those first few, you exploit them, you torture them, you're a murderer, I don't even want to say the R word, because it amazes me how much they want to use that word and for what we do, and it belittles actual victims. But my TikTok then started to take a path of, all of a sudden, instead of just educating, now I'm going on the defense. But I think people really responded well because that's what's cool about TikTok, is you can take those comments and do a video reply. And no other social media platform has that specific feature. And people really responded well to, here's a nasty comment or an uneducated comment from a vegan or an activist or whoever, put it on a video, highlight it, talk about it. And obviously we're not going to change that person's mind, but we can use that talking point and help other people understand why it's wrong, where that idea even came from, and throw the correct information out there. So a lot of my channel now is probably half educating. I try to be funny, and they usually don't do very well. But then the other videos are responding to some of these just absolute crazy ideas. And those are the ones I think people, it's edutainment, it's educating and entertaining. And I think that's what makes TikTok kind of special.
Yeah, I mean, and what I'll see is, people will say, "Well, Dan, you're doing a good job," but 95% of the ranchers, the dairy out there, are doing the bad things. And so what's the reality of the situation? I mean, I'm sure other dairymen. I mean, you've talked to them, you probably see. I mean, maybe not on robots, but I mean, what's the reality of how dairy farming is done in? I wouldn't even say the U.S. I mean, you could go to the UK, to Australia, Ireland. I'm sure there's very similar things. And so, what's the true sort of way people do things?
99% of the time when there's an issue with abuse or an animal being treated the way it shouldn't be, I'd say over 99% of the time, it's never the farmer. It's usually a hired person, somebody who's never been around animals, who's just generally not a great individual to begin with. Like at the Fair Oaks, the situation, that's their trophy as far as a vegan activist goes, is Fair Oaks. And they painted every farm that was like them. They got that undercover footage, and it was the same 5 people in that was 30 minutes over and over and over. It wasn't widespread like they had us think it was, but those were all employees. And what they don't tell you is that those employees all sign a contract. It's called the farm program, Farmers Assuring Responsible Management, that one, obviously they're going to treat animals according to these guidelines. But what's more important is the person filming it was an employee. They also signed a contract that said, if we see abuse, you are legally obligated to report it. And guess what they didn't do for 3 months? They didn't report it. So when these instances happen, it's usually somebody who isn't a farmer, isn't even related to them. It's just an employee who probably shouldn't be there in the first place. But the problem is the hiring process. You don't get a full judge of someone's character in a 30-minute interview. You just can't. And so that's why a lot of farms, especially these big farms, have so many protocols in place to where beyond the interview, making sure our protocols are being followed. And if they're not, what are the consequences? And on a farm-to-farm basis, you'll see cows that live in all different living environments. Our co-op, Prairie Farms, where our milk goes, we get random inspections. And so obviously I'm not out there running around beating up my cows, but on a welfare aspect, they'll show up at random and they'll look at things like cleanliness of the cows, body conditioning, what's their hair coat look like? Is their water clean? Is their feed, where they eat feed, clean? Just actual lifestyle conditions of the cows. They'll look at those at random. We don't get much announcement when they're going to come check out those things. And if we fail, a couple of them, we get like 30 days to fix it. But if it's not good, like prairie farms will absolutely not pick up your milk anymore. So they're incredibly strict on, even if I was a terrible person and I got my kicks, I got my jollies out of beating up cows, I'm not going to be farming for very long. There's entities in place that will prevent me from being able to farm.
Yeah, and it's kind of interesting because I actually visited Fair Oaks Farm years ago. My dad used to live up in Northwest Indiana, and that's not far from where it was. So I actually went and took a tour, and I thought it looked pretty cool. So when I saw it in the news, I was actually pretty shocked to see that stuff. But again, as kind of the layperson, you don't know. I mean, you see the propaganda, and one of the things I thought you said that was pretty interesting. I get, what was the movie? It was either Cowspiracy.
Yeah,
might have been Cowspiracy.
That's one.
It took them years and years and years to gather enough footage to put a film together or something.
That was Dominion.
Or Dominion, okay.
And Dominion was filmed in Australia in some back alley farms and some back alley processing plant, like their slaughterhouse footage. I don't know for sure where it was at, but I think that Joey Carbstrong fool had a lot to do with it. And again, it's the same thing as Fair Oaks. They found that one place, and then they want you to believe it's all of them, which we know it's not true.
Yeah, and the other thing I think that's interesting that you do is, I mean, we hear a lot about factory farming, industrial farming practices, and I would assume that you would take, I don't know what the definition sort of eludes me. I know with the CAFO, it's something like 1,000 animals or.
Yeah.
So, I mean, as far as, but I mean, the process doesn't necessarily have to change from small farm to big farm. It's just scale bigger. And, so some of the, it's an awful, you have a bunch of cows. Well, you can have a lot of cows, and some of the companies that have a lot of cows are some of them the best as far as I'm finding, right?
No, you hit the nail on the head. Honestly, in terms of animal welfare, some of the bigger farms have an advantage of actually being able to have a tighter control on how closely their animals are monitored, just due to one employee can focus on one task. Like, I'll be honest, like there's times out in our barn, I'll have a cow in the morning, like, oh, she's got let's say she's got a sore foot, and I got to give her some aspirin or some anti-inflammatory or something. And then all of a sudden something else happens. Feed truck pulls in, some delivery shows up, or a robot calls me and it's broke. And all of a sudden now it's the afternoon and I still haven't gotten that cow that with the sore foot her aspirin. Does that happen a lot? No, it bothers me sometimes that kind of thing has to happen. But on a big farm, my job is working with these cows. So it's almost on a bigger farm. Welfare is not dictated by farm size. And actually, the bigger the farm, the more closely they're monitored. If there's a place where, some sort of animal welfare could slip through the cracks, it'd almost be more likely to happen on a small farm. Now, it doesn't happen. And again, it's 99% of farms are good, obviously, because even us, a smaller farm, we're monitored. But farm size is not indicative of welfare. I do what a 5,000 cow farm does. I just do it smaller. What I think people start to get a sour taste in their mouth with, the bigger the farm gets. I think people generally understand that, maybe not the vegan activists and some people, but factory farming is a made up term. It's made to scare people. They think of a dark, cloudy sky and polluting water and poisoning streams, and that doesn't happen. Now, factory farming, does that usually mean a bigger farm like a CAFO? Yeah. But does it mean the animals are mistreated? No. But I think the biggest issue that just your average run-of-the-mill person who does support animal ag, they do support what we're doing. The issue that they might take with the bigger farms is just it doesn't seem as personal, if you know what I mean. Many of my cows have names. I know all their mothers. I know their grandmothers, their daughters, their granddaughters. And that type of, close connection doesn't necessarily happen on a 5,000 cow farm. So I think that's where the general public kind of starts to lose maybe their I don't want to say support, but that's why the average consumer tends to support smaller farms. But in terms of cow welfare, how they're treated, how they're fed, the quality of the milk, the nutritional quality of the milk, the safety of the milk, the bigger farms do just as good, if not better of a job than some small farms. But What makes Prairie Farms, our co-op, unique is their average farm size is 150 head. So Prairie Farms, part of their selling, their marketing program is they have, they might ship X amount of milk, but it's from more smaller farms versus like your Walmart type milk is going to be this amount of milk, but it's going to be from like 2 or 3 really big farms. So consumers have choices, but at the end of the day, what I try to tell people is my milk is the same as their milk.
Yeah, let's go into a couple of common misconceptions. One I always hear is, you're taking the babies and snatching them from their mothers, and you're killing all the males right away. You basically turn them into veal like on day 2 or something like that. What's the reality of the relationship between the cow and the calf, and why do you do what you do, and some of that stuff?
Mm-hmm.
I know because you got a 1-minute TikTok or 2-minute TikTok, but
yeah.
sometimes it's tough to get all that information in such a short video presentation.
Yeah. So the reality is calves are separated from their mother soon after birth. And that sounds blunt, and I'm going to be blunt. I'm not going to sugarcoat that. But the reason is for the benefit of the calf primarily. And there is some benefit to the cow. But the things to keep in mind on why we do that is we used to leave the calf with the cow. For generations, we did that. And I shouldn't say generations, for decades, really. But we moved away from that because that wasn't working. We could go back to that if you're okay with calf mortality rate tripling, if you're okay with cow mortality rate going up, and if you're okay with calf morbidity, calf sickness rate, probably quadrupling. We can go back to that if those kind of things make people feel okay. The reason we pull the calf away is, number one, cows don't care. Holstein cows don't care. Now, Angus, Hereford, Simmental, some actual beef breeds of cows, they have a very, very strong maternal instinct. Now, it's kind of a what came first, chicken or the egg? Did we start, forming a symbiotic relationship with dairy cows because they're bad mothers? Or did they become bad mothers because we formed a symbiotic relationship? And I think it's the former. I think, we realize that these cows are terrible mothers. They have no maternal instinct. And I think it's a really beautiful thing that we've done as humanity, that these cows live a better life under us. We get to take care of their calves, and we benefit, they benefit, and the calf benefits. But the reason we pull the calves away is, number one, the mom just doesn't care. I have several cows that have no ears because they were just completely abandoned on a cold day. After 15 minutes of being outside when it's -10, their ears are gone. So I got to catch them right away. And we found one. I talked about her in some TikTok. She was, half her body was frozen and she was in there for probably 20 minutes. She wasn't supposed to calve for like 2 more weeks. So I wasn't closely watching her. But the mom, it was a first timer, wanted nothing to do with her. And my oldest cow just calved. She dropped her calf on the ground. She was standing there looking at the calf. I looked at her. I grabbed the calf. I walked it over. I carried it into the calf barn. She didn't follow me. She didn't care. She said, "Hey, I got better things to do. You take me down to the barn. I'm going to eat some feed, chill out." They love where we put the cows, and they trust what we're going to do with the calves. So if calves stay with the moms too long, especially a Holstein calf, where the moms don't claim them, that calf's going to get into other things. She might try to nurse off other cows she shouldn't be nursing off of and damage that cow's udder if there's no milk there. Or she's going to run around and lay somewhere she shouldn't be. Like, calves have no self-awareness of cleanliness. So a cow could, defecate in one spot, and that calf would just go lay in it or lick it. They're just not smart animals. So for their sake, for cleanliness, for their health, and for their safety and well-being is why we separate the cows. We started doing that probably 30 years ago because we saw a need for it. That's why we started separating them, was there was a need for that animal to be safe.
Yeah, and you mentioned tripling mortality rates, and my understanding I don't know if it's the same for dairy, but in the beef industry, mortality rates are very low, 1-2% typically, maybe as high as 3 or 4. But so if you triple that and you get up to 5-10%, you obviously these cows are dying. But when you look at ruminants in the wild, and I've seen some studies on, not exactly the same animal, white-tailed deer, University of Pennsylvania did a nice study. It was something like, by 34 weeks, it was something like over 50% mortality. And if you contrast that to the domestic animal agriculture industry, it's not even anywhere near that. Is that correct?
No, right, correct. But they'll tell you that cows will live up to 20 years on their own, right? Which we know that's absolutely insane. There's no way a cow without any human involvement would ever get past the age of 3 or 4. And if they did, it'd be a miracle.
Yeah, and that's due to predation, I'm assuming, and probably elements and freezing to death and starving to death and that type of stuff.
Illnesses, diseases that we vaccinate for, we can keep them we've been a closed herd since 1974, which means other than bulls coming in to breed the cows, we've never bought a female, a milk cow in 50 years. So, we just don't have any risk of any outside pathogens coming into the farm.
Yeah, let's talk to another topic, because artificial insemination always gets a bad rap, and they use the R word, to kind of,
Yeah.
as you say, it's unfair to women and men that have been actually molested in that way. But there was a I'm sure you're aware, in Colorado they were attempting to get something on the legislature called the Pause Act, which would make AI a crime basically. And I think in Oregon they're still looking at doing something like that. But
Yeah.
what do you tell us about why do we do AI? I know there's bullying injuries and stuff like that, but maybe explain that to people who don't understand what's the advantages of AI. Does it
Yeah.
harm cows, or the cows? Does it hurt them? Is it violating them? What's going on with AI?
Sure. So for those of you who don't know, AI is artificial insemination. So this process started, I'll have to double check this number, but I think some of the first AI was done as early as the 50s. They would actually airdrop packages back then because they couldn't mail them on the ground fast enough. But we've been doing this for 50, 60 years. And it started because there was a need. The vegans would have you think we get our jollies off of sexually abusing cows, which is asinine. They're the ones who turned this into a perverted act, not us. For us, this has been a standard procedure that benefits the cow, benefits the farmer, and benefits the consumer for a few decades. They're the ones who had to go and pervert it. So the reason we do this is we can get better genetic advancement. So if we have a cow who has certain quality traits, maybe her frame could be improved, or she could give more milk, or we want better butter fat or protein in her milk, we can breed that cow to a bull that can offset her negative aspects of those components. Versus if you just have one bull running around the whole barn, that one bull is all you got. So we get hammered because we also are bad on the environment. But you can't be anti-artificial insemination and say we're bad for the environment, because AI has made us so much more efficient on a land-based usage. Compared to like 1960, we use something around like 90% less land per gallon of milk, 60% less water, 40% less fossil fuels. And a lot of that is because AI. We have cows now that eat the same amount of feed as they did 50 years ago, but give 3 times the amount of milk, because we realize cow A gives more milk than cow B. So we just quit breeding those cows' genetics, and now we can select these cows' genetics. So from an environmental perspective, AI allows us to progress genetic advancements faster. And but from a farmer, let's talk about us. Holstein bulls are incredibly aggressive. Just 3 miles away, there was a farmer who was killed, I think it was 2 or 3 years ago, by a Holstein bull. They're more docile because we get more involvement with them. And then one day they just see you so we trust them more. That's what gets us in trouble. But then one day they just snap, and there's hundreds of farmers who get killed every year still by Holstein bulls. So for a farmer safety perspective, we don't like them. And for a cow safety perspective, we've had cows on good footing. It wasn't like they were on slippery cement. The bull will get belligerent and 20 times within an hour try mounting that cow. The cow will fall down. He still keeps trying to mount the cow. They break a hip, they break a leg, the cow has to get put down. So for the safety of the cow and the safety of the farmer, AI is incredibly beneficial. For the sake of the environment, environmental impact, water usage, land usage, which we get more and more people and less land, it's going to be more important to get more food off less land. AI is very good for the environment. But in terms of hurting the cow, like you mentioned, obviously when a vegan activist phrases it as we shove our arms up their rectum, it sounds terrible. But it's a standard medically practiced procedure that's been done for a long time by veterinarians to detect pregnancies. And when a vet is doing a physical exam on a cow, one of the first things he does is rectally palpate the cow, because he can feel the rumen, he can feel the kidneys, he can feel organs from that cow's, because their anatomy is just different than ours. So we can't compare cows to humans, because obviously on a human, again, they're the ones who perverted this act, not us. But that is, so you will rectally palpate a cow for the artificial insemination process. But Their stool is bigger than my arm. My arm is nothing for a cow. And we have to think of, if it hurts the cow, my end profit is going to be less. So for a cow to settle a pregnancy, if I'm introducing things like adrenaline into her system, which is another hormone, that's going to inhibit the natural hormones she produces to encourage a pregnancy to occur. So she's less likely to get pregnant if I'm injuring, if I'm causing physical pain, if I'm causing emotional suffering to the cow. She is also going to be less likely to get pregnant. So if AI caused those things to happen, we would have quit AI 30 years ago because it wouldn't have worked.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things they talk about is there's no consent there, and my assumption is a bull is not courting a cow and providing, they're not developing a nice relationship. I mean, am I correct in that assumption? Do they go around courting cows, or do they just go up there and find whatever cow's available?
Yeah, when we had bulls, I never saw one come up with roses or flowers or anything, if that's what you're asking. So no, and bulls don't care. So if I had a bull's mother, sister, and daughter in the pen and they were raised together, it's not like, you know, an activist would say, well, they don't even know who they are because you separated them. It doesn't matter. Back in the day, they were all raised together and they had to keep them in separate pens, because that bull, when it was in season, would breed his own family and not even care. He is, again, they could be raised together, they could be stall mates, they could be litter mates, whatever you want to call it. They have no self-awareness of who or what they're breeding. And it's not good for an animal to be bred less than like 12 months of age. And cows can't, like, they're not a cow, they're a heifer when they haven't calved yet. So a heifer can be fertile as early as like 8 or 9 or 7 months in some cases. So if a bull was in that pen, and one of those animals came into heat, you know, and that means they're fertile, they would try to breed that 7-month-old animal, which is not good for that animal. So even with bulls, they still have to be managed by the farmer to make sure they're not being reckless with what they're trying to do.
All right, another misconception is, my God, you have cows indoor, they should be out in pastures grazing all the time. How dare you put them indoors? Talk about the environment. You know, I mean, you know, we see, you know, I drive by and I see cow sheds and I see, you know, you see different barns and stuff like that. And the activists will say you're torturing those animals. You know, they're being crammed into little confined spaces. What's the reality of what you do, and I assume what many other people would do?
So my grandpa would be rolling in his grave if he saw what people are trying to get farmers to do now. Because again, the reason cows are in the facilities they are is because there was a need. So my grandpa, you know, when we started farming here in 1941, there just wasn't the research or data to suggest what cows like or where cows thrive. It was just, well, this is where they're at. This is what we're going to do. It's what we've always done, right? And so in the 60s and 70s, we had an older barn. We built a new barn in 1971, which worked well. We made bigger stalls. We had bigger stanchions, is what they were called at the time. We put in a different vacuum system, which was more gentle on the cow's udder. But the animals still went outside. They still went inside. And when the herd got bigger, they couldn't all fit in that barn. And so what we noticed was it was a fight to get cows out of that barn to go outside when they had to go eat. So we did feed the cows in the barn. We fed half the herd inside the old barn and half the herd outside because there wasn't room. And it was a fight for the cows, for who had to go outside and who had to stay inside. They didn't want to go outside. And that barn wasn't even to the standards that our new barn is, that the barns that we have today. But the need back then was cows had to go outside and eat. And in the wintertime, when there's 4 foot of snow, you can't pasture an animal. So we have to put feeds up through the summer months so we can feed the cows through the winter months. And when it was 30 below, there were some beautiful animals. My dad and grandpa never forgot this. In like 1980, there was a blizzard, like 88, I think. They had to sell like 20% of their herd because they just got frostbitten teats. Dairy cows, you know, they're probably a little bit less weather resistant than maybe they would have been back in the 1700s because we've been domesticating them. But even back then, those animals in the 70s were still a hardy animal. Just there's not many animals that can survive those kind of crazy low temperatures. So again, there was a need. So we said we got to do something better for these cows. And so that's when freestall barns, that's where our animals are housed. You'll see in my TikToks. That's when those started really to come about. And even our freestall barn. So it's a 4 foot wide by like 72-inch deep stall full of sand bedding. It's deep sand bedding, so they can nestle in there and get comfortable. Even in that barn, they used to have access where they could go outside or they could stay inside. We gave the cow the choice, and those cows never chose to go outside. They love the barn. Cows will go where cows feel they will thrive. And if you put them outside, guess what they do? They look for cover. They look for shade. They don't want to be out in the sunlight. That's one of the biggest things I get too is, well, cows need vitamin D. They need to be in the sun. Well, they don't want to be in the sun. So my biggest argument for people is when they're saying you got to get your cows outside is, why would I put cows somewhere they don't want to be? I give cows what cows want. I don't give cows what people want.
Yeah, and I've seen, you know, the sand bedding, and then I saw you had it rigged up so tire, so when they go to the bathroom, it does, they don't lay in it. And then you have a robot that cleans that stuff away, I guess, several times a day, and so it's a pretty nice facility. Talk about you know, because a lot of people talk about, well, you're forcing these cows to be pregnant and to be lactating, and therefore, you know, they've got these swollen, giant, enormous udders, and they're lugging this around outside their will. How do the cows? Because I know you say the cows basically have free access to the robot. They go whenever they want. How's that work?
Yeah. So cows with our robots, they come get milked whenever they want to. It's a full free flow system is what it's called. But yeah, the idea that we've caused these that their udders are in pain and they're swollen, they completely miss the idea that all we've done with these cows is put them in an environment and given them feed qualities that allow them to give more milk. So cows have always been capable of giving large amounts of milk. All we've done is figure out what to feed them, where to house them, and what kind of environment to put them in to allow them to meet their potential. So like every one of us, like I have the potential maybe to lift as much as ShawnBaker does. But if I don't put myself in an environment where I can thrive, if I'm eating junk food, if I'm sitting on the couch all day, I'm never going to meet that potential I could have. So is Shawn, being that he can lift more than me, is Shawn an unnatural human being? No, he's putting himself with a diet and a lifestyle where he can meet his potential. And we're doing the exact same concept with the cows. So cows, it's kind of like the weight. I use a weightlifting analogy. You know, like, can you lift a lot because you eat a lot? Or do you eat a lot because you lift a lot? They kind of go hand in hand, but when you start demanding more energy, you eat more. And so it's the same thing with cows. We know they can produce this much, but for generations, we just never gave them the energy necessary to meet their potential. So if they were only eating this much, guess what? They're only going to give that much when they could be given that much if you met their energy demand. So you can't force a cow to give more milk. You just can't. All you can do is put her in a good environment with good forage quality, and she will meet her potential. And some cows do have more genetic potential than others, and that's where AI comes into play. But you can't force a cow to give more milk. You have to allow her to meet her potential.
Now, let's talk about that potential. Let's talk about a couple things. So TMR, or total mixed ration, is something that I learned about from Fair Oaks Farm, you know, but there's a lot of people that will say, my God, you're giving those cows some corn and it's awful for them. Why do you do that? What is the benefit of that? Does it harm the cow? I mean, I understand, you know, there's a if you eat too much, they get bloated and stuff like that. But and you make the point that corn is a grass, and I've had other people make that point too, but I think there's a lot of, you know, I've talked to some ranchers that said if you have a cow and there's a pasture and there's a cornfield next to it, they'll wander into the cornfield and start munching out of their own volition. But what's the rationale behind the TMR, and why have we went to that?
So let me think of a good place to start. I think corn has been unfairly villainized because it is a grass. So like oats is a grass that produces a grain. Oats. Barley is a grass that produces a grain. Barley. I could go on and on. I'm not going to be redundant. Corn is the exact same concept. And again, it's the same thing with farming. Is necessity is the mother of invention. And a lot of the things that have happened in agriculture happened because there was a need, but these needs can't be fulfilled if we compromise animal welfare. So corn is, for one, it's a great way to utilize land. Corn can grow, for silage, can grow 28 to 30 ton to the acres versus like oats, barley, wheat. You're lucky to get 6 to 7 ton per acre. So let's say I shifted it completely away from corn. I would need 3 to 4 times the amount of acres just to feed my herd. So my grandpa produced 2 million pounds of milk off the same acres that I'm producing 6.5 million pounds of milk, because we've realized which forages can grow the most tons per acre. And now we're still Soil health is a whole nother conversation. We avoid monocropping. We want to build organic matter. That's a whole nother talk. But corn has been really unfairly villainized because everybody thinks we use so much of it that it's killing the animal. Now, the logic that corn is bad for the cow can be quickly defeated when we look at my herd. My average herd age is 6 to 8 years. My oldest cow will be 14 in January. And my oldest cow, she was born in early 2008. She's had corn her whole life, a balanced amount of corn, like anything. If we have too much of one thing, if I eat nothing but candy all day, or if I eat nothing but broccoli all day, one thing, you're not gonna thrive off of that. So corn, what we do with the cow is, unlike humans, actually when we feed cows their forages, or their diets, I'm not feeding the cow. What I'm actually doing is feeding the microbes, the rumen microbes in the cow. So the rumen microbes break down the feed, and then the cows actually digest what those microbes output. So cows digest bug poop. So we feed bugs, we don't feed cows. And what we found out is these bugs really thrive off of certain ingredients, and corn is just one of those ingredients. It's a really excellent energy source. The rumen bugs really thrive off of starch. We get good butterfat, we can get good protein, as long as it's a good balanced diet. If I overloaded corn, it would be bad for them. If I overloaded protein, if I overloaded grass, if they ate just grass, they would become frail. Their hair coat would be rough. Their stool would be slimy because their GI tract doesn't do well off of strictly grass. The more rumen microbes we can have, the healthier the gut of that animal will be.
I mean, you'd have to be, I'm sure you're aware of this, but I mean, I think most of us would be living under a rock if we haven't noticed that there is a huge worldwide campaign to diminish, minimize, and in some cases, end animal agriculture. My understanding, at least and you'll probably know this better than me, that from the dairy standpoint, we've seen reductions in actual milk consumption over the years, but increases in yogurts and cheeses. And so the actual net dairy output is actually, the demand is actually up worldwide. Is that still the case? Or are you feeling any, I mean, you can't help but see this stuff. I see farmers saying, hey, the government is paying them to put down their animals and taking over their lands and that sort of stuff. Is there any truth to that? Is that conspiracy theory? What do you think what do you think for the future of animal agriculture for, say, the next 5 to 10 years is going to be?
I feel really good. The thing is they want people, I'm trying to think how to say this. The way they go after a person's moral, if they can break the spirit of people and have them believe that animal agriculture is dying, then it's more likely to happen. Does that make sense? So if they can get you to believe that it's dying, then their cause is more likely to be realized. The truth is the exact opposite. Dairy output grows like 3 to 5% every year. And it has, in the last 30 years, I think dairy output per year hasn't gone up a handful of times. So there's a demand there. And so we're going to keep meeting that demand because it's there. Now, their counter argument is, well, farms are decreasing every year. But the reality of that is it's because look at all the baby boomers who used to farm. Everybody knows, I mean, maybe not my generation, not Gen Z, but my generation, all of us can name a grandpa or an uncle or somebody who farmed. The next generation can't do that anymore. So there's a massive amount of farmers there's an exodus. So the reason farm sizes are dropping is because there's just a lot of them retiring. There is some economical motivations too. When they sell, like right now, with land prices up, a lot of farmers are taking advantage of selling because it's a good time to do it. Same thing with corn and some other commodities. But cow numbers are actually down from 30 years ago because of AI, because of genetic advancements, because of feed quality and housing conditions. But the actual milk output will continue to go up every year because there are more mouths to feed. And I think there's something to be said about, we're going to realize cows are necessary for this ecosystem. And to an extent, milk and meat might even be a byproduct of a cow taking care of the environment. So we might realize a cow's main goal is maintaining soil health, recycling carbon, building organic matter. And guess what? These environmental stewards also produce beef and they also produce milk, which is a great food source. Because if we just eliminated cows and many of these other commodities from our environment, you would deplete organic matter, you would deplete your topsoil. We wouldn't even be able to grow human consumable crops if those animals didn't exist. So the idea that animal agriculture is going to start phasing out is a myth. And I keep getting messages on TikTok from people. Is the government offering to buy, your crops, or is the government offering to pay you to destroy your crops? I'm 90% sure that's largely conspiracy and fear mongering. If that is taking place, it's likely some kind of CRP program where they're paying you to like give your 80 acres a break for 3 years and pasture it or something like that. And it's a voluntary enrollment. There's no forcing or blackmailing or threatening like some of these messages I'm getting going on. Is the government capable of doing something stupid like that? Probably. But I know thousands of farmers, and I'm in communities and Facebook groups and ag talk groups with millions of them. None of us have heard of that or actually received that kind of letter.
I mean, that's somewhat reassuring to hear that. I wonder, you talk about the soil health and environment, and people will say, well, you're feeding corn to your cow, you don't care about the soil. There's ways to grow plants that are actually soil friendly, in my understanding. Do you have any thoughts? And then the other thing is, obviously methane is, we always hear about methane, and I understand it's a cyclic gas and it doesn't hang out in the environment very long, and it breaks down to CO2
Yeah.
and it's part of the carbon cycle. It's been there forever and ever and ever, but there's still people that want to use that. And so there's people that are developing feed additives, red algae from Australia that cuts back methane. So talk about you, because you said it's another topic, but I think we should talk about how you as a dairyman can impact the soil in a net positive way. What can you do?
So the amazing thing about farmers is we've done so many advancements in the last 50 years, and we always do it. They want to make us out to be these greedy capitalists that we will do whatever it takes to make a buck. But at the end of the day, we can't make money if our avenue of making money doesn't thrive, i.e. soil and cows. So for generations, we moldboarded. And if you don't know what that is, we would take the top 6 inches of soil, maybe 8 inches, completely invert it. So you would see a cornfield after fall harvest, and when you moldboarded it, it would be black. And back when my grandpa was my age, if there was one stalk sticking up, you grabbed a shovel and you went out there and buried it, because that neighbor wasn't going to know that you didn't get your soil black. I mean, it was a pissing contest between you and your neighbor who could get the blackest soil. And after one, and this wasn't even in the 50s and 60s, but farther west, we had the Dust Bowl. That was because so many farmers moldboarded and the soil got carried away by windstorms. Now, here in the Midwest, we have heavier soil. We weren't as susceptible to that. But we started noticing through the 50s and 60s and 70s. And, we back then, though, the family farms, we didn't moldboard and monocrop, because when you were a family homestead in the 50s and 60s, you might moldboard this field, but then for the next 4 years, it might not get moldboarded. But once we got more into the commercial farming, when it was just like corn or soybeans and maybe 2 or 3 crops being cycled, farmers at that time had a tendency to moldboard every single time. But after a few years of that, we started noticing that our topsoil was getting less. So we stopped. You barely see any moldboarding anymore. And if you do, it's on maybe an organic farm where they have to do it occasionally for some kind of weed control or manure incorporation. But as a whole, moldboarding is gone because we've realized it's not good for the soil. And so now, back in probably 70s and 80s, no-till started coming into play, where we realized we can grow crops without tilling the soil at all. And that is becoming increasingly popular because we see there's benefits. We see it's good for the soil, which is where we make our livelihood. We can't make a livelihood if the soil is dead. So what our farm does, we no-till and cover crop. So in the fall, I want to keep living roots in that soil year round. Because what's really unique about the way our ecosystem and our environment is designed is if I take a field and I make it bare, guess what happens? Something grows there. Even if I don't put it there, the soil is made to have something growing in it. And farmers take advantage of that, and we can control it for the good of the soil and the good of us. Because what we can do is in the fall, I'll seed down a rye and some other species like hairy vetch and radishes and other things that build soil structure. And then in the fall, I'll plant that. Some of it survives the winter, a lot of it does, and in the spring we'll terminate it. And so we had living cover going through the winter. I put corn in the spring after terminating the rye, and so our soil structure is better. We can control how many, because weeds can be very invasive. So water hemp is a problem around here, and so if I put what I want to grow in the soil, I can suffocate any water hemp and those invasive weed species growing. So again, it's the same thing as cows. We can't profit off of abused cows. We can't profit off of abused soils. Now, Are there still farmers who are aggressively tilling, or maybe when they shouldn't be? Yes. Now, is their soil going to be dead in 5 or 10 years? No. The next generation, if those older farmers don't change, the next generation will, because we can see the benefit of it. So I think in 10, 15 years, I wouldn't doubt if 80 to 90% of farms will no-till. The problem is, like, the human consumable crops, like lettuce or potatoes or carrots. I'm not sure about peanuts. I don't think they're as aggressive. Some of those food types, if we switched away from animals and went solely those, guess what you'd have to do? You would have to aggressively till every single acre, because those human consumable crops rely on a very aggressive tillage. But because that's not where 80% of the land is being used for, is those human crops, those vegetable farmers can rotate. Now, if you just want every single person to cut meat, eggs, and dairy and everything out of their life, you're going to have to turn a massive amount of acres to those heavily tilled food types. And then we're going to be, again, destroying organic matter, losing topsoil. And that's where what we do with livestock is beneficial to the soil.
Yeah, let me just go back a little bit more about, because manure, obviously, you've got you've got cows in a barn, they're defecating, you're clearing it, you're collecting. I guess you have, maybe, I don't know if you have a lagoon or something like
Yep.
that, but
Lagoon.
how do you because they're talking about, well, that's bad for the environment, it creates all these problems. How do you deal with the manure? Because if the cows aren't in the field grazing, then you've got to put
Right.
the manure out there, correct? So how does that work?
Yep, and I think grazing is a good fit for many operations. Like for the young stock, that's something we try to do. The problem with the milking herd is we're tied to the milking facility. If we want to harvest milk, they got to stay close to the robots. But there's many dairies where their young stock are grazing, so that's the way they handle their manure. But so let's look at a dairy cow, because it's virtually impossible for a milking cow to graze. So again, that's why we put so much research into making their barn comfortable. We talked about that. But what we do is their barn is stored in a cement lagoon, so it doesn't leach into the ground. It's not contaminating water. And that cover crop I mentioned that we put on in the fall, that'll be as tall as a pop can going into the winter months. So it's 6 to 8 inches tall. And that is what traps our manure, traps our nitrogen. So we're not putting soil nitrates. We're not putting nitrates in the water. We're not contaminating, the creeks or anything like that. That cover crop absorbs it, holds it into the soil. And otherwise, if you don't do cover crop, that's where some farmers will till it to incorporate the manure. But we do soil tests. So I know how much nitrogen, how much organic nitrogen, Kegdal nitrogen, sulfur, potash, potassium, what that manure is composed of. And we do soil testing so we can see which areas of our farm need it the most. And so we'll under apply where the soil doesn't need it, and we'll over apply where the soil, and then when I say over apply, I don't mean recklessly, but I mean compensate where the soil does need it. So otherwise, 50 years ago, before we had soil tests, we would just blanket the whole farm. But now we know which areas of the farm need it and which farms don't. So we're not, wasting it where it doesn't need it, and we're not getting it where it does need it. So we manage the manure and the nutrients that these crops and the soil needs by soil testing and by manure nutrient testing.
Yeah, as far as the technology that's come out, I mean, obviously the robot is probably pretty much of a game changer, I would imagine, for you. But I mean, what do you see as far as the future in dairy with regard to technology? What kind of cool things are out there that they're going to make the life easier, more efficient, better for both the farmer and for the animal?
So the robots are cool, and I don't know what the robots in the last 20 years are still the same design. They're just getting quicker and better. Like 20 years ago, a robot might have milked 40 cows. Now I'm milking 70 cows, so almost twice as much. AI, not artificial insemination, but artificial intelligence, is really going to change a lot of stuff, and a lot of that is going to come back on animal welfare. So I'm not making this up. I was at a precision dairy conference in Minnesota. There is AI that can detect if an employee is beating a cow, and I don't know how it does it. And there's also AI that can detect how well. So if you don't have robots and you have a parlor, you're putting the milker on by hand. This AI can detect how well that individual person is cleaning the cow, or if they're following the protocols that the farmer says, "Hey, I need you to clean the udder in these steps." This AI can detect if that person is doing that properly to insane accuracy. And the other technology that I saw, it can detect how long a cow is laying down. how long she's standing, how long she eats, how long she spends with her face in the feed, how long she spends not with her face in the feed. So those things are all going to improve animal welfare because we can see our cows laying, out in pasture, how long they're laying down in here. And all this is a camera with some artificial intelligence software that can detect what these animals' movements are like, what their lifestyle is doing. And some of that stuff is really going to change the game. It's exciting to see. Again, I don't know how it works. It's over my head, but all of it is for the benefit of the cow. That's how we turn a profit is making sure the cows are well cared for.
Yeah, I've seen some neat stuff on the beef side. They have satellite imagery which tells them where to graze their cows. They can look
Yeah.
see that they've got now they've got collars so they don't have to erect electric fences, so they can restrict them on their phone.
And that's another thing too. They're coming out in the robot barns. It's like, let's say in my pen of 190 cows, I can put on these VR goggles, and if I need to go find 3 or 4 cows, I just tell it, and then it just shows me virtually where those 3 cows are. So I don't gotta walk around and disturb the whole pen just to find those 3 cows. So again, all in the name of not disturbing cows. That's where the software is coming from. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that is amazing stuff. What has been the so now that you've been doing TikTok and doing the social media, what has been your biggest favorite part of that? I mean, do you have something that you're getting reward from that, or what's been the least favorite part?
I'd say my most favorite part is honestly stuff like this. I mean, I've made so many connections that when I started this, I guess almost 4 months ago, 3.5 months ago, I never thought these kind of connections would be possible. I have the opportunity this summer at the state fair to show the governor around. So me and the governor are going to hang out and we're going to talk about farming, which I think is really, really exciting. Something I never would have gotten to have done before. But making these connections, the farmer friends I've been able to make, but by far, probably the most rewarding stuff is so I'll go live 2 or 3 nights a week in the barn and we'll just walk around the barn. They'll ask questions, I'll answer stuff. I did that Saturday night, and we had 73,000 people tune into that live over that course of an hour and a half, which is just incredibly humbling that someone thinks that many people think I'm worth listening to. But what's cool is every night I get done with the live is I got 7 or 8 messages in my inbox just thanking me for educating them, and they had no idea. And some of those messages are often, I used to hate dairy farming and now I don't, or I used to be vegan and now I'm not, or I started drinking milk again, or I started buying Prairie Farms milk, which is it's really rewarding that people used to believe a lie off of pure propaganda and now they're not. And it's because all we've done is I haven't fed them another lie. I'm not yoking myself up to somebody else's lie. We're yoking ourselves up with the truth. And that's all I'm doing with my phone is just showing these are what happy cows look like and explaining that we've been doing this for 70 years on our farm, and we've gotten pretty good at it. So that's why we do what we do. But I think the connections I've been able to make with folks like yourself and just other farmers has been really, really great, really, really encouraging. And just knowing that we're actually getting people to start consuming dairy again, because it's and meat in general, animal products, because they're good for people. And honestly, eating beef is good for cows. If cows didn't exist, the soil would die, and obviously they would face extinction. So if you want to support cows, the best thing you can do is eat cows. Same thing with deer. Deer populations would get insanely overrun, and their overall welfare would suffer as well. So thank God for hunters. The hardest part sometimes is the nasty comments. I never posted much on Instagram, and once I kind of got a following on TikTok, I thought, I'll throw some TikToks on Instagram. And until I had, it was actually your following that started jumping on my Instagram, and actually, because I can't monitor both social media accounts. So I'm over here on TikTok and I'm getting blasted on Instagram, and I don't have the energy to maintain both. And I'm really glad that your following jumped on board my Instagram, because now when somebody posts a nasty comment, before I can even go reply to that nasty comment, there's 30 of your supporters and other supporters just taking that person to town. So I don't have to worry about it, which is great. But that is the harder part is waking up to messages on Instagram or TikTok where they're calling me a rapist and a murderer and all those things. And for the most part, it's water off a duck's back. It doesn't bother me. But when it's those really public comments and somebody takes an Instagram, there's a whole Instagram page dedicated to mocking me, which at first was kind of having never been on social media before, it was kind of a shock. But now that there's 2 or 3 of them, it's kind of, I don't really care. But it's more difficult for my wife, I think. I think she's concerned about my kids seeing their father called a rapist and a murderer and an animal abuser. And obviously, my kids are going to be raised in an environment where they know that's not true. They're going to know who I am, obviously. But I think that's a concern that my wife has is just those kind of just nasty people. And sometimes we do get concerned about our farm safety. Are they going to show up and try to do something stupid? It hasn't happened yet. We did invest in some security cameras in case something does happen, but that's the downside of it is there's just a lot of really crazy people out there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, and when you get these parody accounts, and I've had several made of me, it's almost you kind of made it. You kind of like, hey, you
I know.
You care what you think. So I mean, you impact them. Like we say, you're living rent free in their head, I suppose. But there is the thing, like I said, so many people are disconnected from our food production. As you know, people have, the rural areas have kind of largely been abandoned in many cases for the cities. And so many people live, in a city, they've never been on a farm or a ranch, or their education has been through one of these vegan propaganda films. And it's nice to be able to say, this is what happens in real life day to day. And I think that's so incredibly powerful and so frustrating for these people that are out there trying to make this counter narrative. And you can like, look, here's video, come out to my farm. And, I've had the opportunity, thankfully, I have so many gracious, ranchers and farmers. I've been able to come out and hang out and see what's going on. And, you see what happens in real life. And it's very different from the movies, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And I'd love to give people tours. That's probably the number one question I get on TikTok. It's like, can I come see your farm? I so wish I could say yes to every one of those people. The problem is there's some of them that probably have some, ill intention, and I wish I could give every single one of them a tour. One, I don't have the time. I'd have to charge an insane amount per person to make up for the income I would lose from the farm. But yeah, there are some really great people out there, and I really wish I could reward all my supporters with a tour and show them exactly what happens. And someday, I think we'll make that happen. I think we'll try. Going to keep getting worse, right? I mean, the disconnect from food to table is going to keep getting bigger. So I do think it's going to be important to show people where their food is coming from. And TikTok has been a great avenue to do that, but you just can't beat the in-person experience either.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's great. And hopefully, you'll inspire more, food producers to show, show us this stuff. Cause I think it's so incredibly important that we understand where our food comes from and make the choices based on that rather than, somebody in Silicon Valley that wants to sell you this patented food that they have intellectual property on, and they've got a lot of money invested in that to make the narrative they want. And so,
isn't it ironic that Leonardo DiCaprio was the producer for Cowspiracy, and he also happens to be one of the number one investors for Beyond Beef?
Yeah,
kind of ironic.
I don't know that it's ironic. I think it's intentional. And the same thing,
right.
It's like the Game Changers film where James Cameron is invested in the largest pea protein factory in North America. You see, I mean, it doesn't take much to see the conflict of interest there. But anyway, Dan, I really appreciate you taking the time out. This has been very educational, wonderful, and more importantly, keep doing what you're doing. I mean, you're educating. I mean, as you know, and you're learning, you're educating more and more people every day and inspiring people. So just for the people that aren't aware, if they want to see your videos or that stuff, where do they go? And I know Iowa Dairy Farmer, but what's the is it?
Yeah, just Iowa Dairy Farmer, TikTok, Instagram. My name's Dan Venteicher. That's really the only handle I go by. I don't do much on Twitter. It's really just TikTok and Instagram. So that's where you can find us at. And if you have any questions, send me a message on TikTok, comment on a video, drop something in the Q&A. I can do a video reply. That's far and away my favorite thing to do on TikTok is answer people's questions.
Yeah, that's great. And you do a great job. You've got a very easy way of doing it and making it understandable for the rest of us knuckleheads that don't know anything about ranching or farming. But thanks, Dan. Have a great day.
Yeah.
Take care of yourself and the family. Keep doing what you're doing.
Yep, it's my honor. Thank you very much.
All right, guys. We'll see everybody tomorrow. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.